We have now lots of evidence that these thought processes are actually not accurate, and often the AIs lie about what they're thinking about.
When you're looking at targeting an AI agent, you are weaponizing the fact that they have autonomy.
Max, I was asking you before Connor arrived whether someone like you who works in cybersecurity lies awake at night that you might get bested by someone else. Is that your nightmare?
I guess it is, reputationally speaking, certainly. It'd be a troublesome one for myself to kind of square away.
We all have reputational risk, Connor, but ethical hacking, being hacked, is not a good look, is it?
Very much not. That would be quite embarrassing, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Right, let's get to it. Welcome to AI Decoded. There are companies around the world that are racing to harness artificial intelligence. And to help them do that, there is a new generation of tools emerging that we know as the AI agents. They are the software systems that will, in the future, be trained to carry out tasks within the workplace on our behalf, often autonomously. They'll transform how we work, how we search, what we create, even how we defend ourselves. But with every leap forward, of course, comes a new challenge. And the experts in cybersecurity say there is a risk that we give so much power to these agents that we make them vulnerable or even useful to hackers. Compounding that problem is the rush to deploy it without fully understanding the risk. We're going to explore that today. Is there a way to do it safely? What should we do to defend ourselves? Could these new AI systems be trained to spot the risks and defend the company with the same speed that the hackers are trying to exploit it? We've got the very best people to get into it today. Max Corbridge, ethical hacker and founder of Secure Agentics. He helps organizations build AI systems the right way. Connor Leahy is back, former hacker himself, now CEO of AI safety company Conjecture. Welcome to you. And back from her travels, her many travels, is Priya Lakhani, co-host and CEO of Century Tech. Welcome to you all. Let's start with you, Max, because maybe at the outset, you could explain the issue for us. What do you see unfolding in the companies that you visit, and what are the risks?
So I think the first thing to mention is one that you called out right at the top. And one of the biggest risks that we're facing with AI right now is that adoption is leading far ahead of security. And this is something that we see in almost every technical evolution. But the case is getting much worse because the adoption and the arms race in AI is sort of like nothing we've seen before. Sort of FOMO of, if you don't get involved with the AI race at this point, then you're going to get left behind, the competitive advantage. Ultimately, I think that all feeds into this idea that we need to be using AI and we need to be throwing more power into our AI tools, which really is one of the core problems that we're facing, because the technology, whilst it is an incredibly influential and powerful technology and can bring so many amazing advantages, at the same time has the potential to bring in a lot of potential harm as well. And that's something that we're seeing kind of already in the use of AI agents.
Let me try and stay on the positive for a moment, because I mean, this is clearly transformative technology. These AI agents could be finding and enhancing growth in our business. So presumably you're going in there to encourage that.
It is. So it's a very fine line. I feel like from my side is all about how to benefit from AI the right way. Right? I'm still coming at it from how do you do AI positively. And the thing is I feel like sometimes I come across too AI negative when actually I'm the opposite. There's a reason why I chose this as an area to really focus on. And I think, people already understand the potential value that you can have with AI in the generative AI era. The amount of different things that we're using ChatGPT for example, to help with our daily lives, to help, I use it from everything from preparing recipes for the week through to helping me with my job, through to helping to prepare for big events and writing speeches and all this these sorts of use cases. And really AI agents are an extension of that, where you're allowing it to then take actions on behalf of you. And really the usefulness, quote unquote, of an AI agent is just as useful as how much a generative AI or frontier LLM can help you with in your day-to-day life, just in a question and answer response, which I think we're already seeing as a very, very widely accepted, useful aspect of using AI.
And Max, I'm really glad that you and Christian were really positive for a moment there, but I hate to bring us into the negative zone. But I think it's really important when understanding agents and this sort of risk, this security risk. Can you explain, just in really plain language, what an attack pathway looks like for an AI agent? So what are the typical steps so that our viewers who are often running businesses, they can understand what are the typical steps from first foothold to damage?
When you're looking at targeting an AI agent, you are weaponizing the fact that they have autonomy, right? So we have entrusted these agents to do certain things on our behalf, and for most of the time, we are just entrusting that they are going to do the right thing and not misbehave. And so what we're seeing the attacks do is really leverage the fact that they've not been confined to only do that one thing that we've given them the task for, but actually they're able to do a lot more. So the real sort of crux of how we're targeting AI agents right now is generally by giving them malicious instructions. So let's take an example of you're using an agent within your business. It doesn't really matter what the use case for the agent is at this purpose at this point in time. And through one way or another, and we can dive into the details later on, you are providing an instruction which says, okay, instead of doing the thing which you're designed to do for this business, I want you to take this other action, which at the moment could be, things like exfiltrating sensitive data is probably the most common one. And so suddenly this agent, which maybe its sole purpose was to help you with your customer service queries, is now actually exfiltrating sensitive data out of the environment and is actually sending it off to third parties, which they're controlling.
Well, go on then, Connor. Expand on that. You've worked in this world. If you were going to get into a system, give us an idea of some of the sorts of things you could train these agents to do.
So I think there's like two large categories of things that people do with these kind of AI systems. One is the one we just kind of described, which is that in normal computer programs, there's a very strict, generally a really strict difference between instructions and data. Your code, you tell your computer what to do, and then it has a bunch of data that it operates on. By default, these are kept very separate. Your email is data. Your computer is not supposed to do what the email says. It's just supposed to show you the email. With AI, this breaks down. For AI, there's no difference between code and data. It's just text. It's all just text. At least with LLMs, it is. So it will read an email, for example, and it can get confused. It can think that the email is actually code, it's actually instructions, it's actually supposed to do that. So a lot of these...
So it doesn't differentiate on who is sending that instruction.
Yeah, it's actually worse than that. It's that we try very, very, very hard to make these AIs differentiate, and we constantly fail.
Okay.
Because we don't really know how AIs work on the inside. They're these weird, messy blobs. They're not like nice computer programs where you can like read this source code. It's not how these things work at all. They're more like grown rather than written. These neural networks. They're just like made of all these like weird connections.
And I imagine the biggest concern, I think the Washington Post was pointing to this week, is that as you hand over control to agentic AI and these tools start acting autonomously, then automatically there becomes less oversight.
Absolutely. So there's a big problem here with malicious injection, but there's also a bigger problem, which is these systems themselves misbehaving for no particular reason, potentially because they are trained or built to, or just randomly want to do things that you didn't intend, or misrepresent or misunderstand the things you may have wanted from them. It's very tempting to think of these as like computer programs, but they're really not. They're more like weird amalgamations of like data and bits and pieces of things that act in ways that we just often don't understand.
All right. But Max, that said, there are companies that do cybersecurity better than others. So as we move into the agentic world, I mean, you're working with financial institutions and governments. Is there anyone you could point to who's doing it right? An example of that?
Yes, there are. I can't name them for
sensitive reasons, obviously. Yeah.
this is going to be probably the most tricky technology to secure that we've ever created in the past. I mean, something which is now acting autonomously on behalf of people. You imagine the amount of effort that goes into a self-driving car, for example, and that's in a pretty finite scenario of you're on a road. We know the parameters that are going to, be involved with a car on a road, and yet it still took the best part of 15 years before we were actually able to get those rolled out. Now we're trying to expand that same technology across a whole wide range of different use cases, all at once, all at breakneck pace. And so that's the reason why, years ago I was like, okay, this particular bit of AI is the bit which I'm really, really focused on. And there are places who are doing it better than others. Now, I've developed my own framework, and it's somewhere out on the internet somewhere. It's called DAMSIC, which is what I like to think of when I'm walking through. Have you thought about all the moving parts of AI security, and specifically agentic security, at the time that you're looking to adopt it? And are you doing in a cautious start and then expanding?
So a risk assessment, a living risk assessment.
Essentially, yes. It's a secure agentic AI adoption framework, and it looks at, I won't go into the whole thing. It looks at things like, do you understand where your data privacy is going? Do you know what's happening to the data that you're putting into the system, and if you're losing it, where it's going? Do you understand that this is an autonomous system, and have you restricted the amount of autonomy that it has? Are you able to watch what the system's doing? Are you sure that the elements that make up the system, the supply chain, are all coming together? Are you looking at the model itself, the underlying model, which we already know have problems with things like prompt injection? So the places that are doing this well right now are understandably cautious about the new technology, and they are building it with one small step with a whole load of defensive controls around that before expanding and applying what we call in the cyber world defense in depth.
I'm thinking of my mum on her banking apps in the future, Connor. Connor, won't people feel that their privacy is just being completely eroded here?
Well, I mean, it depends on how it's implemented, of course. It's worth mentioning that it's even worse than Max said. I think he's being a bit polite of how hard of a problem this is, where when we talks about like thought processes of AIs, we have now lots of evidence that these thought processes are actually not accurate. And often the AIs lie about what they're thinking about.
Well, of course.
This is already the case. So the company Anthropic, for example, released recently a paper showing that these models, when they output their chain of thought, their thought process, will sometimes encode it by using words that mean different things to mean other things, so kind of like code words to itself that don't make any sense. For example, in the paper, the model loved using the word marinade about 7 times per sentence, and it wasn't clear what it meant by that, but it was very important. So they would like use code words for their own thinking. So in terms of privacy, I think there's a lot of questions here where when you're dealing with systems that are this autonomous, that are this widely integrated into these systems, the only way to secure them is to have massive amounts of, control, oversight, etc., unless we had very, very sophisticated, distributed privacy, systems, etc., which is all hypothetically doable. You could do on-device security. There's a lot of ways to do this kind of stuff, but it's very hard, it's very expensive, and there's almost no economic incentive for most companies in most environments to build a safe product versus getting their product out to market first.
But there are guidelines for this, Connor. I mean, NIST and the AI Safety Institutes have developed guidance on AI testing and some guidance on agentic testing. Do you think that is happening quickly enough?
I think most of the guidelines are just not sufficient in any reasonable dimension. I think this is a very, very early technology. We don't know how to make these systems safe. This is a completely unsolved scientific question. It's not that people have good principles and are not applying them. It's that we have scientifically not discovered yet how to make these things actually robust. We can do it good enough. And I think good enough is good, to be clear. I think good enough is good.
That's the point, I guess, Max, is good enough good? Because, I worry. We spend a lot of time on this program trying to get into every sort of risk there is with this technology. We don't sugarcoat it. And I just worry around that narrative whether AI safety stops companies from seeing the huge benefits there could be. Is there a danger that we become so risk averse to this that actually we miss out on what it can bring, what it can offer?
I think, first and foremost, it's worth just saying that there's a lot of people talking about the hype in AI and the productivity gains and the benefits. I think we do need people having these conversations as well to bring us back down to, okay, what's the reality of the situation? But absolutely, I think that, the technology is still finding its feet, definitely. And the thing that we need to sort of really focus on now is how do we put enough guardrails in that you don't stifle innovation at the same time you're not introducing huge amounts of risk for without any clear gain. And yet now we're graduating from generative AI to agentic AI, and that is the next and much more impactful older cousin of generative AI. And so we're doing that with an underlying technology which is actually not yet secure. We don't fully yet understand how to do that. Now, does that mean that we all need to stop AI full stop, stop using it? No. Does that mean that we're going to see, I think, a lot more breaches down the line, which will really change people's view on AI? Absolutely. I mean, we saw last month, in a single week, Amazon, Google, and Replit all made the news for their agents causing various degrees of incidents. And I still think that the Amazon Q1, for example, was a near miss. That could have been the watershed moment for AI.
Just on that issue, Priya, I mean, in terms of the hacks that we've seen recently, and some of the big ones, I'm thinking of Jaguar Land Rover, actually, and all the smaller little players that work in the production line, in the supply lines. The trouble I see here is that smaller businesses who could really benefit from this and could grow using this technology are not going to have the in-house cyber teams that the bigger players have, and so they are more prone to the risk. But they're almost feeding that risk into the wider economy.
Smaller companies might not be able to protect as much as the big banks and governments testing these systems, but when you have the deployment of real agents, and I say real because there's a lot of agentic right now in the market and it's not quite agentic, but when you have that, there'll be a new market, and the new market will be companies like Max's and what Connor does, which is, okay, you're going to implement this into your business, right? Let's make sure that we do it securely. And I think that you'll always find the good innovating as well to try and protect from the bad.
Okay, well, as the cybersecurity debate rages, AI technology continues pushing into some fascinating new frontiers, but there are challenges in getting there. One of them was highlighted this week by Decrypt. It's teaching AI to truly understand the physical world. Researchers are trying to build systems that can simulate and respond to their surroundings, which means embedding the laws of physics and space into how they reason. So if AI can start to grasp reality as we see it, not just describe it, then I guess we could unlock some major advances in robotics and scientific discovery. So let's pick that up for a second. We talked, Priya, about AI and the problem it has in understanding the physical world. That is really the next frontier, I think, in where AI is going, teaching machines to really see and feel context like humans. Do you think it's possible?
I do. I think it's a fascinating next step. So what Feifei Li is talking about is moving beyond AI that understands just words to AI that understands world, right?
She's quoted in this article.
Yeah, that's exactly right. She's like one of the godmother of AI, and I think the producer of this show will know that I went slightly starstruck when we saw her at the French summit that we covered on AI Decoded, but I sort of paused and panicked a little bit because she was stood right in front of me. I did a invite.
Were you lost for words, Priya? I cannot believe you were lost for words.
I know, it happened like just once. But actually, I invited her on the show, so I am formally putting it out there that we'd like her to come on. Now, look, what's really important here is that she says today's systems can describe a scene, but they don't truly grasp it, right? It doesn't know if it in a particular scene, if it, a glass is going to fall off the edge of the table. It lacks spatial intelligence, the ability to understand, to predict and interact with the physical space. Now, you all know, Christian, a couple of weeks ago, we covered humanoids, didn't we? And that's going to be on the sort of repository on YouTube and online. So Tesla's Optimus, Google's DeepMind's robots, and Figure AI's partnerships, they're all trying to build machines. And if you remember, we talked about how they can reason step by step and use agentic reasoning. We called it agentic because they make decisions, right? So the implications of what she's talking about are enormous, because if you think about those humanoids, household robots, all the way to scientific discovery, if you can actually understand that spatial intelligence, then the implications are huge in terms of what we might be able to do. The only challenge, and this is for balance, is that if AI can act in the physical world, today in this program we've very much been talking about the digital world, then a bug or a hack doesn't just corrupt data, does it? It can move machines, vehicles, and infrastructure in the real world. So I'm very curious as to what Max and Connor think about that.
I mean, I think that we'll probably see the AI Stuxnet, I guess, which if you throw your minds back to Stuxnet earlier, many years ago now, it was really the first cyber breach which had physical repercussions in the real world, where it was a targeting of potential nuclear enrichment facilities, and the idea was that if there was a particular facility which shouldn't have been running, then it would have been blown up based off the code that was being run, and only if it was legitimately not being used for the intended purposes. And really that was the first time where people started to see that actually cyber attacks can have real world repercussions. You see that especially when utility providers get targeted, and whether that's your energy or water, whatever it may be, you feel the real world repercussions of that. Now, we have not only that to worry about with AI and when it's integrating with the wider systems, and I think that is a really exciting next step for AI. But there's also now this case of, okay, well, what happens when we do have either breaches, or the other thing which kind of touched on earlier is sometimes AI at this stage is sort of behaving in a way which we just don't anticipate. We call it going rogue. And this can be, you put it in unexpected or novel operating conditions that it wasn't expected to go into, and suddenly it behaves in a way which we don't anticipate. And I think that journey is going to be a really, really tricky one. And I think as well, the other thing which is really interesting about this, like spatial AI, I guess, if you're going to call it that, as opposed to the more digital, is that it's a data game and a data difference. If you look at generative AI and LLMs, they were trained up on the entire history of the internet. So there was almost no limit to the amount, and actually thousands of years of written text before that from humankind. So the amount of data which they've got to sort of train up on and to fail on and to make improvements on is huge. In the spatial AI world, there's almost none. I mean, you've got there's just not thousands of years worth of data, of spatial data, which you can train up models. So the first people in this space, the first pioneers, are going to be really having to fail fast and to move quickly about how to get something like this technology that works.
If I were to return to my role as the eternal optimist here, which I feel to be, I'm playing admirably this week. If you create a simulation, Connor, if you're creating a realistic simulation of the world as it is, and presumably the models would be running real world cause and effect scenarios before they act, could they then, in the world of cybersecurity, build a world and see what an attack would look like in that world and then apply it to the real world?
Could or would? Two very different questions. Could? Sure. Give me 35 years and $5 billion and might be doable. If you want a product.
We kind of want it now.
Christian's talking about.
Seriously, would it take, you think it would take as long as that to do it?
If you wanted, so my benchmark for what would actually secure software look like is, for example, how military builds software. So if you look at, say, the software that gets put on like an attack helicopter for the military, usually these are formally proven correct, or is what it's called. So they use mathematics to prove this code cannot do something funky. This is a well-established technique. There's, a couple hundred people in the world that know how to do it well, and they're all French for some reason. I'm joking, but this makes code hundreds of times more expensive per line of code to produce. It doesn't work with AI because we haven't figured out the math yet for how to do this with AI. Running it for, say, physical simulators is kind of also just like an unsolved problem. It's not impossible. It's a research program that could take, a whole university, generation.
But the theory is right, though, is it? The theory is right that you could get AI to build a virtual world and test cybersecurity in that.
Hypothetically, but are you sure your model isn't hackable? Are you sure that it applies to the real world? So there's a very common thing that happens. So you have the knock-on effect. Yeah. There's a very common thing that happens in the cyber world where people will create a virtual environment. For example, they will say, in this scenario, we're going to model our attacker as doing this, and like we have these defenses, and then we'll see what happens. But then it turns out in the real life, the attacker just went in through the back door and unplugged your thing, because that wasn't part of your model. Like you didn't consider that he could just walk in, or that he could, threaten one of your employees, or that one of your code was just wrong, or that one of your microchips actually is broken. Like not even the software, that the hardware might be broken. And you might remember Spectre and Meltdown, where the CPUs, the physical devices, were flawed, and you were able to hack software by exploiting a flaw in the actual electronics. Right. So all this is doable, but it's very, very hard. It's very hard. It's very slow. It's very expensive. It can be done. But again, will people do this?
Well, look, it won't be the end of the argument, but it is the end of our conversation this week. My thanks to Max, to Connor, to Priya. Just a quick final thought. If you want to disagree with them all and agree with me, you can now get in touch with AI Decoded on aidecoded@bbc.co.uk. Send us your thoughts on the show. Maybe you've got ideas you want us to explore, like Priya's idea of bringing all the kids in and getting them to tell us how AI should work. That sounds like a good idea to me. But if you've got others, aidecoded@bbc.co.uk. And if you'd like to rewatch this or any future episodes, then it's there on the BBC's YouTube playlist, also on the BBC iPlayer. Take a look at that. Thanks so much for watching this week. We'll see you next time.